You canceled again, not because you don't care, not because something came up, but because the thought of going out, making conversation, performing your best self for a few hours, it just felt like too much. And here's what nobody talks about: you didn't feel guilty for long. Because the moment you closed that door and settled back into your space, something in you exhaled. If that sounds familiar, you're not broken, you're not antisocial, and you're definitely not alone. There's a whole psychology behind people who genuinely love being home, and it goes much deeper than shyness or laziness or fear. It touches on how your nervous system is wired, how you process the world, and what actually restores you versus what quietly depletes you. This video is for the person who's been made to feel like something is wrong with them, when the truth is, something is just different about them. Let's talk about what's really going on. You've probably noticed that some people leave a party and feel electric, buzzing, energized, ready for whatever's next. And others leave that same party and feel like they've just run a marathon in their head. This isn't attitude, this isn't effort. This is your nervous system doing exactly what it's designed to do. Introversion, as psychologist Hans Eysenck theorized, is linked to how much stimulation your brain naturally seeks out. Introverts tend to have a higher baseline level of internal arousal, which means the outside world, with all its noise and social demands, can tip them into overstimulation faster. Extroverts, on the other hand, need that external input to feel fully alive. Neither is better, they're just different operating systems running on different settings. This connects to something called optimal arousal theory, the idea that every person has a sweet spot of stimulation where they function best. Too little, and you feel bored and flat. Too much, and you feel frazzled and overwhelmed. For some people, that sweet spot sits in a loud room full of people. For others, it sits in a quiet apartment with a good book and a cup of tea. Staying home isn't avoidance. For certain nervous systems, it's precision. It's knowing exactly what you need and choosing it without apology. But there's another layer here, and it's about control. Not in a controlling, unhealthy way, in a deeply human way. The outside world is unpredictable. Conversations can go sideways, plans change, people can be overwhelming or unkind without warning. Home removes much of that uncertainty. You know where things are, you know the sounds, you know the rhythm. And that predictability isn't weakness. It's a form of psychological safety that allows your mind to finally stop scanning for threats and just be. Research in environmental psychology has long suggested that our sense of control over our surroundings plays a significant role in stress regulation. When you walk into your own space, your body often physically relaxes in ways it doesn't in public. That's not in your head, that's physiology. And when the mind is finally quiet, when the noise of the social world falls away, something interesting happens. Creativity tends to emerge. Deep thinking becomes possible. Problems you couldn't untangle in conversation suddenly become clearer in solitude. Psychologists and thinkers alike have long recognized solitude as a necessary condition for reflection, insight, and original thought. It's not nothing, it's actually where a lot of the most meaningful mental work gets done. And yet, the world doesn't treat it that way. We live in a culture that glorifies being busy, being out, being surrounded by people. Someone who stays home is often labeled unmotivated, boring, or depressed, while someone who never stops moving is called driven and vibrant. But fulfillment doesn't have a dress code. A quiet Sunday that genuinely restores you is not lesser than a packed social weekend. One life isn't more valid than another just because it photographs better. Here's where it gets important to be honest, though. There's a difference between staying home because it genuinely nourishes you and staying home because the outside world has started to feel threatening. Between solitude as a choice and isolation as a slow retreat from things that feel too hard. If home has become the only place you feel safe, not because it's peaceful, but because everything else feels impossible, that's worth paying attention to. Not with judgment, but with curiosity. Because sometimes what feels like preference has quietly become avoidance. And those two things can look identical from the outside. For people who genuinely love being home, not hiding, but thriving, there's often a kind of richness in their daily life that others miss entirely. A morning routine that feels sacred, the pleasure of a meal made slowly, a corner of the house that holds a particular kind of light in the afternoon. These aren't small compensations for a life unlived. They're the actual texture of a life that's been intentionally built around what matters to them. Joy doesn't have to be loud to be real, and ultimately, it comes back to this. Some people simply need less from the outside world to feel full, not because they're numb or closed off, but because their inner world is rich enough to sustain them. They process deeply, they feel things fully, they find meaning in the quiet. That's not a limitation. That's a different kind of abundance. So here's the question I want to leave you with. When you're at home alone and completely comfortable, is that peace or is it avoidance? Not as a challenge. As a genuine, honest question worth sitting with, if these kinds of ideas resonate with you, consider subscribing. We explore the psychology of everyday human behavior here, the things most people feel but rarely have the language to explain. And in the next video, we're going to talk about something closely related: why some people feel like they don't belong anywhere, even when they're surrounded by the right people. You won't want to miss it.